has operated. We can track its history since World War II, since the OSS in World War II. And mind you, the first thing President Truman did about the OSS after the war was to commission a study of criminality and corruption in the OSS, because under the license of secrecy during the war, it had become one of the most corrupt organizations in the U.S. government. We only hear about its glory and drama and daring do, of course, in the World War II films. Now, getting Lucky Luciano out of prison, using him first in our own docks in the United States to control labor, and then moving him to southern France to break strikes, and then into Sicily, and he winds up with the people around him producing the French Connection, major flow of drugs. Similarly, we had this massive thing that went on for a decade and a half in Southeast Asia. Actually, it began long before that, but the dramatic part of it, the noisy part of it, for a decade and a half. And we wound up creating the Golden Triangle, in which the CIA, Air America airplanes, were flying in arms to our allies and flying back out with the heroin. We launched the largest, this is something that Jimmy Carter did, Admiral Turner brags about it, the operation in Afghanistan. Biggest single operation, I'm told, in the history of the CIA's secret wars. And sure enough, very quickly we produced the Golden Crescent, which is still the largest source of heroin perhaps in the world today. And then, of course, in the 80s, President Reagan was focusing on Central America. And now, once again, we have massive documentation of how the Medellin grew at the same rate of the U.S. involvement in Central America. And the people in the Medellin were buying their way into making payments to people like Felix Rodriguez. This came out in the Millán Rodriguez trial. Felix Rodriguez was reporting directly to his old boss, President Bush, the CIA director, ex-director, then vice president. The Medellin was making payments to him of the size of perhaps $10 million to buy access to the Contra-CIA planes so that they could fly back into the United States with drugs, landing at bases where they would have national security passes, so the Customs and the FBI and the great body, I want to emphasize this, the great body of conscientious officers trying to serve in these organizations and do their jobs and do them conscientiously are frustrated, stymied, stalled, bypassed, and they're helpless, and they watch people come through with a national security pass of some kind, go right through the base with a truckload or a plane load of drugs, and on their way to distribute them inside our society. Trying to summarize this third world war that the CIA, the U.S. national security complex with the military all interwoven in it in many different ways, has been waging. Let me just put it this way. The best heads that I coordinate with studying this thing, we count at least, minimum figure, 6 million people who've been killed in this long 40-year war that we've waged against the people of the third world. These are not Soviets. We have not been parachuting teams into the Soviet Union to kill and hurt and maim people, especially not since 1954, when they developed actually a capability of dropping atomic weapons on the United States. They aren't British, French, Swedes, Swiss, Belgians. We don't do bloody, gory operations in the countries of Europe. These are all people of the third world. They're people of countries like the Congo, Vietnam, Kampuchea, Indonesia, Nicaragua, where conspicuously they nor their governments do not have the capability of doing any physical hurt to the United States. They don't have ICBMs. They don't have armies or navies. They could not hurt us if they wanted to. There has rarely been any evidence that they really wanted to, and that in fact is perhaps the whole point. If they had had ICBMs, we probably wouldn't have done the things to them for fear of retaliation. Cheap shots, if you will, killing people of other countries of the world who cannot defend themselves under the guise of secrecy and under the rubric of national security. Meanwhile, and this is getting back to what I'm really talking about here, there's been a massive attack going on quietly against the U.S. legal system to reconstruct it in favor of the national security complex at the expense of your freedoms and mine and the very nature of U.S. society. For example, in the Iran-Contra scandal, we were able to document dozens of cases where people were caught smuggling cocaine into the United States, and they were let go because the CIA wrote a little letter to the judge and said this overlaps international security activities, and so we would appreciate if you did not prosecute. There's been the quiet passage of these laws about as fast as the system could absorb them, and I'm going to review just some of the major ones, could absorb them without drawing too much attention to them. They want to get the laws on the books, then they will be able to use the laws. Now, here are some of the things they have on the book. Victor Marchetti, in the mid-70s, they obtained the right to pre-publication censorships of books. They can tap into a book and now censor it and delete passages based on the Marchetti ruling of the Supreme Court. Censorship. Frank Snepp, they sued him successfully over his excellent Vietnam book, Decent Intervals. They did not accuse him of revealing secrets, just the principle of the fact that he wrote a book. They sued him for all his profits, on just civil damages. The government, the CIA, if you will, if you can comprehend that, suing someone for damages. In my own case, they managed to seize all the profits from my first book, In Search of Enemies, and put me under a court order so that everything I write for the rest of my life, I have to submit for censorship or risk going to jail without trial. Phil Agee, they picked up his passport without accusing him of any crime, and the Supreme Court supported him, and they got a precedent. So in the next war, if you're going down and trying to find out what's going on and write about it, they will have the law in which they can simply take your passport and you won't go down and observe what's happening and write about it anymore. You recall the Progressive magazine controversy where they prohibited some scholars from publishing perfectly overt information about how bombs are constructed, atomic bombs are constructed. The Morrison ruling of the Supreme Court, in which they ruled that publishing information in a magazine could be prosecuted under the old original espionage laws. Espionage to publish something in the newspapers, and they put him in jail. Trung Humphreys. Trung, helping Mr. Humphreys to get contact with his family in Vietnam, managed to get access to some official use only documents which the State Department admitted had no damaging effect to anyone whatsoever. But Jimmy Carter, the president, personally ordered what should have been illegal tapping and surveillance of Mr. Humphreys, and they jailed him for 15 years. They managed to pass the Names of Agents bill, which makes it a felony to write about government operations in such a way that the names of these people who may be committing heinous crimes inside our society, they may blow your loved one away or your child's head away with LSD, and yet if you write an article about it under the present law, they can prosecute you for revealing the names, even if you don't reveal the name, but you just say the gentleman who's distributing drugs in our organization, like CSPES or whatever, they can prosecute you for publishing that in your own internal paper, if they will now. The law is on the books. They haven't used it yet because they're getting these laws all solidly consolidated until they have the next national security emergency, at which point they'll marshal our society in a way that you have not seen before and use these laws, as I'll show you in just a minute. The Preemptive Strikes Bill, this was a pet of Ronald Reagan. He had George Shultz up front advertising this thing. They failed in the overt passage of the first 5 efforts, but they managed to just do it. This was a law that would give the Secretary of State the authority, or the FBI and the Department of Justice working to the same purpose, the authority to list names of people they considered to be terrorists. And he admitted in public debate, in lectures before gatherings of attorneys, that a provision of the law was that if your name was on the list, you would not be permitted to go to court and sue to have your name taken off the list. Arbitrary, no trial, stamp on your forehead, you're a terrorist. If you're a terrorist, they would have the right. This is the bill that they were presenting to the Congress, and they got it, by the way, in a different form. They would have the right to kick in your door and kill you without due process, and they would be immune from any prosecution. They admitted that they would have to undertake these actions on the basis of information that would never stand up in a court of law, and they admitted that innocent people could be hurt in the process, but in the interests of national security, they said they had to have these laws. How does this work? Brian Wilson, you recall him. He did a nonviolent fast on the Capitol steps, and so they wrote up reports saying he was a terrorist. Now that's quite a jump, but again, he was not advised of this. He was not permitted to challenge it. They just wrote it up and put it out and published it in the FBI records. Then he did a sit-down protest on the railroad tracks at the Concord Naval Weapons Station, and the FBI gave base security reports saying, you know, we have reports that Brian Wilson is a terrorist. And base security told the engineers on trains that some terrorists were sitting on the tracks to block them to stop this train full of ammunition.